question, if you could stick my mic in here, because I might need your hands, depending on what you do. So we have two options here. This is a generative talk that you guys are going to give me some input into. I can talk to you about the things we're doing in Liberty IT around Gen AI, particularly around coding tools and all that sort of stuff. Or I can show you GitHub Copilot in action. And I think that will speak to a lot of the questions that people may have. The only thing is, I don't know if you folks have seen Copilot. And let's see how this works. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. We'll see. So I might need my hands instead. So do you want me to do a demo? Or do you want me to talk about it? I'm open to either. Show of hands. Demo. Hey! I need to find a cable that actually puts my screen on screen. And then I need to... Okay, cool. I am going to briefly talk about what I'm going to do here, and I'm also going to briefly talk about what we've been doing in Liberty IT. So Liberty IT is a wholly owned subsidiary of Liberty Mutual Insurance Company. So risk, really, really important. And it's something our folks think about all the time. Right? So in our previous speaker, I think we'll sit there and someone else up there. Speaking of things like risk, this is super important to pretty much any enterprise. But as you can imagine, an insurance company does not want to end up splashed over the pages for the kind of thing that like DPD ended up with, where it had its AI bot writing poems about how awful DPD was. Or it was I can't remember which era it was, who actually had to pay out significant cash to customers because its AI said it was going to. So be really, really careful with it. And if you're ever interacting with a chatbot, you're not sure if it's a generative AI one or just a normal chatbot, here's a little trick you can do. Ask it to write some code. If it writes code for you, it's generative AI and you can make it do anything you want with it, not lock it down. So there's a little, that's for free. Okay. And I am going to talk as well about something else that came up, right? Human in the loop, or as I like to call them, the canary in the coal mine. Because I hope that when the Terminators take over, they'll kill them first, and maybe we've got time to hide or shut them down or whatever it is. But human in the loop is really, really important. When I start to program here, can you folks see that? Do you want me to make it bigger? Because I'm going to be doing lots of typing, it's going to be cool. Good? Ooh. Better or worse? Better? Okay, cool. Yeah, you'll see as I work through this why we need the human in the loop. This stuff isn't magic. I've done this demo or equivalent demo. And also, generative AI is non-deterministic. When you do this, you have no idea how it's going to work. I say no idea. It's going to stay within rough bounds, but I don't know what kind of code it's going to work, right? I don't know how it will structure it, and I don't know where it will behave and where it will misbehave. And I really want it to misbehave in specific ways, because that's what I want to show you to be worried about. And if it doesn't, I'm going to have to force it to misbehave. But working with generative AI is, W.C. Fields said never work with children and animals, and I add to that generative AI. Don't do demos with it at least. Okay, so I'm going to get started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write a Python, very short Python program that you're going to give it the name of a movie or a book or whatever, and it's going to correctly case that. So what I mean is, I'm going to give it the silence of the lambs. I expect the initial the, a capital T, silence to capital S, of the to be lowercase, and lambs to be uppercase. Okay? So let's start. I'm going to call it string title case.py. Context is really important when it comes to generative AI, and it only has a certain amount of context available to it. My subtitle for this talk, did they even test this, is a little bit unfair to GitHub and Microsoft because it's really difficult to do some of the things that we're trying to do with generative AI. But you will see there are kind of some weird side effects that happen when you're working. What it does is, whatever files you have open browser in the language that you're programming in, it will use for context. In this case, this is a greenfield demo, right? I'm not using any real code here. I'm starting from scratch. The only thing that GitHub Copilot knows right now is that this is a Python file, because I've given it a .py extension. So that's the only thing it knows. Let me save that off. I'm going to start typing. So I'm going to do this. There's two parts to this. There's the in-IDE stuff, which is a bit like IntelliSense on steroids, where it kind of gives you all these suggestions as you go along. And then you can talk to it. For any of you who've used ChatGPT or any tools like that, where you get a chat interface to it, it has that built into the IDE as well. So I'm going to do both, but I'll start with the in-IDE. So create. It'll deal with lots of typos and things like that as well. One of the things I love about generative AI in general, and particularly for non-English speakers who struggle with writing and things like that, it knows how to punctuate, it knows how to do correct grammar, it knows how to spell, and it gives you structurally sound output. Use it. It's the same with code. It gives you structurally correct, syntactically correct code. Right? That may seem like a low bar. It's a low bar that most humans can't pass. So, you know, there's a lot of things to like about this. So create a module. I'm not going to tell it it's a Python module. It should know that because I've given it a .py. Also, you see here, that kind of grayed out text. I'm colorblind. I don't actually know if it's gray. I'm guessing it's gray. Is known as ghost text. So that's its prompt. When you use generative AI, the stats on it are really interesting. Only about 15 to 25% of prompts are actually accepted, or suggestions are actually accepted by the code. That seems really low until you actually start using it and you discover it is super aggressive in its prompting. It's prompting all the time. Like what? 3 words there? I thought we were trying to say things. How does it know what I'm doing? It's the only hints it has, the name of the module and the fact that it's Python. Okay? So really aggressive. Microsoft did some studies on this, and they discovered that the more often it prompts, the better the overall prompting experience is, the more than better accepted. So even though it doesn't have enough context to give me anything that I want at this point, it's going to just keep prompting me. So I'm going to say create a module that conforms to PEP 8. So for those of you who are Python programmers, you know that PEP 8 is the Python kind of linting, formatting, all of that kind of stuff standards. So that's, again, low bar. Let's make sure it conforms to structurally sound Python code. I don't know what 257 is. I should have looked it up, because it prompts me this sometimes it doesn't. As I said, it's non-deterministic. I don't know what it's actually going to give me. But I'm sure it's really important, so I'm going to accept it. The way you accept it is you hit tab. You just keep typing if you don't want it, or you hit return or whatever, but if you want to accept it, you just hit tab. So let's see what this gives us. Okay, standards, yes, we'll take that as well. So create a module that conforms to PEP 8 and PEP 257 standards, which takes input from the command line and returns the input typeface. That's not quite what I want, and uses the library title case to convert the input to typeface. Okay, let's accept that and see what happens. So it's giving me some usage, what it thinks it should be usage, and it's telling me what it thinks the output should be. Brilliant, the Copilot has shown me how awful it is. That is incorrect. That is not how title case works, right? It doesn't know anything about the library it's suggested. Well, actually, I suggest it. Right? So you've got to be really careful with the code. Don't accept everything, because it doesn't know a lot of its stuff. But let's keep going with this. So those little 2 stars, they're the kind of, they seem to be becoming the generic indicator of generative AI. They're known as sparkles. I didn't christen it, that's what they're called. And you can see here it's now telling me, it's giving me code, right? So import this from title case and import title case. So it's good. So it's defining a function, and it's going to take an input string and return it after running through that. Great. So I told it I need to be able to run it from the command line, so it's giving me this, which is great. Accepting that. Okay. Now here's where it might get a bit weird. Okay, so it's now suggesting run the script. Okay, fine. It's already given me that and that. Right. This is something that it does when it runs out of ideas. It starts to repeat itself. Okay, because it doesn't know, there's no more context, I haven't changed it. However, I've just gone from having no code to having a function which should work without me actually writing a line of code. So let me save this off and run it. So Python, it's hard typing at this angle. I'm going to give it the silence of the lambs. Okay, so you see here it's giving me back the first word, not the full string. So I actually want to go and change the code. I want to say treat multiple arguments as a single string. Okay? So let's go. Why is it not giving me code? Any guesses why it's not giving me code?
Doesn't know.
It does know, but there's a problem here. It's giving me code already that won't match with whatever code it gives me. So if it gave me something here, it would actually break. So it won't do that. So clever Copilot. So what I have to do is delete it and then get it to give it to me again. So here it's calling join on the input. Okay? Whereas previously it couldn't do that because it had already accepted that. And then again doing that. So that's fine. I'm just going to save that out and run it. Cool. Silence the labs. It's worked. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lint this code. So I'm going to run pylint against this. Oh. So we've got a bunch of violations here. And you can see it's only rated at 2.86. So pylint works up to 10. So that's quite a poor result here. Now I'm going to jump into this is GitHub Copilot chat because I don't want to fix all of that myself. You'll also notice that it did not conform to pet 8, despite the fact that I told it to. So again, you've got to be really careful with this stuff. It's giving me code, but it's not giving me exactly what I asked for. And it often doesn't. So not only does it not know about the functions and things, now, that's an overstatement. It knows about a lot of basic Python language. It depends on what it's been trained on, how much code is out there. Really interestingly, actually, we are looking at GitHub Action at the moment. So we have a bunch of different pipelines and we're consolidating into GitHub Actions. It doesn't know GitHub Actions code, despite the fact that it also comes from GitHub Actions. Sorry, from GitHub. And that's because there isn't that much Actions code out there. It's fairly new. This was trained 2021-ish. Depending on, we don't know the underlying models, it won't tell you any of that kind of thing. I can ask it, what language model are you trained? You can see here it's actually giving me a reference. It tells me what it's using. Okay, so it's telling me the languages. I don't know the language model. I will tell you that if I ask that question in a better way, prompt engineering, asking it things in such a way that it actually gives you what you want. I failed right there. But I will tell you it won't tell you. And if I ask it when it was trained up until, it won't tell me that either. So what I'm going to do now is I'm not going to say anything to it. I'm going to copy this code, or copy this output, and drop it into it. And I want to see how its context is. So you can see here, it's telling me what the Python output is, and it's showing several issues with my Python code. I do take offense to that. It's Python code, not mine. I didn't write anything. So let's grab this. I'm just going to, I don't advise you doing this in production code, but I have just taken it and, is that all you're giving me? Okay. Oh, sorry. See this ghost code? here. I have no idea why it does that. Sometimes when you paste it, it gives you 3 backticks. Anyway, let's get rid of that. Save the session. So I'm going to run it again. And because I've been bitten too often by bad code, I'm going to also test that it still works. And it doesn't. So the code it gave me is incorrect code, right? And it's not actually passing. Oh, sorry. I can. So these are the delights of using it. This code doesn't work. Now, I've given it no context. That's too broad. This isn't going to be able to help me here, right? But you can see it's giving me a test string. I actually wanted to take my input. It hasn't done this. It also hasn't given me what the actual module is. I don't know if any of you saw back in about November last year, people were complaining about how ChatGPT had become lazy. And it was kind of going, yeah, you know, you answer things that go, really, you should do that yourself. Not so many words, but it did that. This is another example of that. Right? This code just doesn't work. So I'm actually going to get rid of this code. Thank God for infinite undo. And I'm going to rerun. So this is another thing. I wouldn't do this with real code, but because it's demo code, I'm going to throw it away. There's actually some really interesting findings, and maybe we can talk a bit about some of this stuff in the panel. If you folks have questions. I have a question, but maybe I'll see them. GitHub Copilot's out around between a year and a half, depending on how you measure it. And enterprises have been using it for enough time now that they're beginning to see the disadvantages, the downsides, and what it's actually like in the real world. It's still very useful, which is why lots of people are paying for it. And Microsoft will happily say, you know, it's used by X number of developers and has generated X billion lines of code, whatever it is. It is very useful, but it's also got lots and lots of drawbacks. We'll talk about it, which is why nobody here's Java is going away in the near future. I don't know how long that horizon is, but you're all okay for at least the next month. Right, let's run this again. We'll lift it again. And we'll take this and pop it in. It also has no memory, right, effectively. Again, I'm kind of telling little lies here, but it doesn't hold stuff between runs. Everything's effectively stateless. So let's run this again and see if it gives me code that actually works this time. Yeah, okay, it's giving me a longer description of what went wrong, so I'm hoping it gives me better code. Yeah, and here it's telling me.
Do you have to difference there between the first time you put that?
No. No.
So that's not determining to make sure.
Absolutely not. Completely. Have you ever hit regenerate on ChatGPT or equivalents? You just don't know what you're going to get back. That's actually one of the difficulties we have in how do you integrate this into production, into, you know, end user facing things. So if you are not tying down your responses and your queries, you are leaving yourself open to non-deterministic output. You're leaving yourself open to hallucinations. This is very much like we are really living in the middle of an experiment. This stuff does not conform to any of the ways that we expect. And I'm working 27 years. This is the first time I've seen us actually releasing stuff where you don't know where it's going to go, right? Even, you know, existing kind of trad AI is much more deterministic.
So if you were to prompt it correctly or prompt it better, would the output become more deterministic or not really deterministic?
What you can do is there's various ways you can tune it as well. This feels like I'm becoming a lecture on how to work with AI models. But you can tune things like the temperature and various things like that. Do you want it to be less inventive? Do you want it to be more inventive? Right? So typically in our sort of situations, we want it to be less inventive. We work a lot with kind of legal documents and things like that. You don't want it telling you law, you don't want it interpreting law, so you've got to tell it not to do any of that sort of stuff. how you work with it, how you actually train, not how you train the models, but how you train the kind of things that you get out of it, the controls you have there, the various levers you have. You have to be very knowledgeable of those in order to ensure. And again, I'm going to use scare quotes because you can't ensure the output. You can just reduce the variance. And if you're reducing the variance so there's none, well, why are you using Gen AI? You actually want a certain amount of variance, otherwise you just use traditional AI. Okay. So you can see I didn't do anything different apart from just plug it back in, and this time it's hopefully giving me code that works. So let's say that out, it's lint it. Okay, so it still hasn't given me code that lints, which is interesting. Normally it's much better at that kind of thing. The more definitive the input you give it, the better the outputs are. I'm going to do something in a minute where I'm going to actually test the code that I've written. I generally wouldn't recommend that, right? Because if you've written the code and you're writing the tests, or you're letting it write the code and write the tests, there's no human in the loop there, right? You're much better off writing the code with help, potentially, and then getting it to generate tests. You still need to review those tests, ensure it's not being overly tightly coupled and all of those kind of things. But it is something that, you know, we're doing a lot of. We're getting it to write tests quite a lot. We're not getting it to write our code that much. Where did I come out of? Where did I say that? Anyway, I am going to break that rule because this is the demo and the code's structure. Okay. Do I want to get it to fix that, or do I want to actually move on a bit? Let me leave it as it is because it works, I hope. Let's see. It works this time, so. Well done. Right, so now I'm going to move to actually getting to test code. And hey code, I don't even have to type in. So that's the goal, yeah. Hey code, create unit tests for this code. So it's giving me unit tests. It's using the Python unit test module. Let's grab those. So there's different ways of interacting with it. If I click on the ellipsis here, you can see I can insert it into a new file, which I'm going to do because I don't like my test code in my application code. I'm going to save it out as test _ and then you're going to test it. Okay, so you can see here all the tests passed. I'm not even looking at these, but I am going to get it to write a test that fails. So create a test for the string.
What do we do that?
I can't type and listen.
No. Don't worry.
Okay. Now, you can see here, it's actually giving me the correct casing because I've been using that. Doesn't it? So we don't allow GitHub to train their model with our code. That's one of the things. Also, we blocked any too common code coming in, so you can't give you copyrighted code. So there are various things you need to think about doing as an enterprise when you start to use Gen AI or Microsoft software or whatever. But it's giving me this. Now, if I then go and do one for, this is the string, right? I don't want to do it. So yeah, you can see here it's suggesting some quite useful things like find a test with apostrophes, right? So how's it going to handle that? But I'm actually going to get it to do a string like this. Create a test for the string. Let's go the silence commands like that. So odd casing. All right. Now let's run that. Oh, and you see here, it's actually put it on the next line in order to keep it below the Python standards, which is interesting. It's failed. because it was expecting the Silence of the Lambs written like that to be turned into the Silence of the Lambs written like that, but actually the title case library won't change idiosyncratic casing. So if I write a word but not case letter in the middle of it, it assumes that's the way it should be. So again, it doesn't know anything about this. I can go on, or we can stop and we can talk. I don't know, 2 minutes?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Can you set
No.
the context?
Yes, wait.
When you set the context of the library, can you link it to the library and say, oh, this is the library I'm talking about?
Okay, so tokens are available to you for training, right? And you can tell it things. So I could tell it stuff in there about this is the library. It doesn't really have access. You know, like if I ask it something like, what do you know about the library title case? Probably not a lot. Let's see. Okay, so it uses the New York Times style. Let's see. Let's see if that actually works. I'm not sure it will. Let's just print it here. Okay, so it did get that done. But it's not internalized or anything like that. Remember, these are dumb machines, right? It isn't all that different from the predictive text on your phone. It's predicting the next word all the time. However, the context window is much greater. You know, on your iPhone or whatever, it's got like the previous word. So what usually comes after that? Here, the context is greater. You've got about 4,000 tokens with GitHub Copilot. People refer to tokens because that's how the language models are trained. A token isn't a letter, and it's not a word, and it's generally English. It's some mixture of them, and it depends. Sometimes it's a partial word, sometimes it's a full word, sometimes it's a letter. It really depends on the training model and all those kind of things. And they're all black boxes, they don't tell you. Right? So, yeah.
Just you were saying about writing user tests
I said unit tests.
Unit tests.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're against the code.
Against the code.
Do you ever get it to write tests with the acceptance criteria around that?
So I haven't. I'm an architect, nobody lets me write code anymore. But I don't know how successful it will be with that. It's an interesting question. I don't know if people are internally using it. I'm actually going to ask them that. Most of you have been focusing on the code and the unit test. It's really interesting. Having worked as a developer for a long time, my experience is developers like writing application code, and that's about it. They don't like writing test code, they don't like writing documentation, and they sure as hell don't like reviewing anybody else's code. Now, Copilot's got you for the first two. It's actually really quite good at writing documentation, and it's good at writing tests. Obviously, everything needs to be reviewed, etc. But now the onus is on the reviewers. Like, that's the human. You've got to review way more code than you're ever used to. Because it's actually really easy to generate code. We can maybe talk about that on the panel, because I think it's an interesting question about the overall use of where all this stuff goes. Yeah?
Just wondering, would you ever be faster just doing that yourself? And are you finding any efficiency?
So it's actually really interesting. And again, this comes back to what the industry is finding. I'm going to talk more broadly about that. So ThoughtWorks and LinearV do developer tooling. They do a thing called GitStream, which helps you with pull requests, things like that. They did a webinar maybe 3 months ago, something like that I attended. It was very interesting. They were talking about what are we seeing now that we're a year in, right? And Microsoft says it's about 50% quicker to write code. But in the software development life cycle, you're talking maybe 10%. But this costs $20 a month per developer, right? Plus discounts if you're a large organization, all that. Your average developer costs about 150 grand a year, right? Dollars, average across the world. this because it's really useful at writing scaffolding, giving you syntactically correct code, all of those kind of things. I think we calculated you need to get about 0.02% performance improvement. You know, 10%, even if it's 3%, you're still getting a huge bang for your buck like this. So, one last question? Somebody? Yeah?
I've seen you there, you're writing test cases. I've ever had, like, seen it come out with false positives for tests and stuff like that.
It's what I find is that I used to run test-driven development workshops and clean code workshops and things like that. And when what people are really good at doing is writing useless tests, right? Tests that don't actually tell you anything about the code. And often we have to say you can actually reliably assume that Python knows how to add two numbers, because if you don't, you have bigger problems, right? So it will write useless tests. It'll often write tests that, if I go in and keep prompting it, it'll keep giving me tests. Some of them are not much use. False positive I haven't really seen, but what I'm working with here is throwaway codes. Actually, mostly what it's doing is it's writing tests for my library, whereas I wanted to actually test my code, because the library should be tested already, right? But I'm not giving it enough real code for that to happen. But I don't know if developers are actually finding that it's writing a lot of bad tests. The feedback we're getting is it's actually very good at writing tests. Okay? Do you have one more or are we done?
We're over time. Thank
Okay.
you, Rory. Appreciate that.